Hello, my name is Karen Holmes, and I'm the founder and director of the World Peace Organization for the One World Government. And I'd like to share with you today some information about the COVID-19 virus and where it came from and what we can do as a planet to help solve the problem. People are dying now, and lives have been torn apart. The economy is going down into crisis, and the ripples of effects have gone out. It's a very severe crisis that we're going into, and it's going to last a long time. The stimulus packages that have gone out have hopefully been helping, but are they actually helping? And what can we do about the economy to get it set up? What is the future of the situation? And I'm sharing with you this information uh, because this is something that is going to be beyond what uh, President-elect Biden will do when he gets into office, and it's going to take the efforts of everybody involved with this to overcome this crisis. Just like global warming, just like the peace accords and things like that, all the different problems, racism and all these things. These are things that if we don't address the root cause of the problem is going to get worse. First of all, I'd like to just talk a little bit about what happens when we get backed into a corner and what can happen at that point in time. We always have, when we're in crisis, we always have three choices, but only two are apparent. The first one is we can go down into the games, we can react out of fear. The second one is we can ignore the crisis and pass it on to future generations, and it takes 7 generations to actually undo the damage that's been done. Or we can come up with a plan, function out of intent rather than default, and create something that benefits everyone. When you're backed into the corner, you only see you don't see the opportunity to go up. So now imagine then that when you have a chance to go up, eventually what happens is the only option that's left is to go up. I'm going to use, you might disagree with me, but I'm going to use, and that's fine, you can disagree with me. I don't mind that. I'm going to use what's happening now with the virus and what is going to happen. And so what we have now is Donald Trump has not ignored the crisis, but he has gone down into the power games. And we're going to look at the Republican response of ignoring the crisis, the Democratic response of relying on science and relying on the stimulus checks and things like that, the pushing money into the economy, and why both of those are not working. Then I'm going to go on and I'm going to explain the opportunity to go up. So down is, let's say, Donald Trump. I have no evidence of this other than what is happening in the news, what I see by reading the news, just like what's available to everybody else at this point in time. So let's say Donald Trump is responding to this by as a businessman, seeing this as an opportunity for him to invest in uh, the vaccine, invest in that. I'm not accusing him of anything, but let's say that's a power game where he's taking advantage of a situation to invest in the situation. So let's call that a power game, where he's putting his financial situation ahead of himself. Now, let's say that the Republicans support him and they recognize a vaccine as important, and they go along with that idea. And that's not a problem for them because he's a businessman. he understands money, he understands power, and hey, anybody can invest in vaccine companies, and there's probably a whole bunch of people who are investing in Pfizer and Johnson and Johnson and Merck. I don't even know the companies that are involved with this. Okay. So let's say that's one option, and that's to go down. He's not solving the problems. He's not looking at a solution. The number of deaths that are a problem is a problem, and people are dying, but hey, it's like the flu kind of thing. Now, the other alternative is straight ahead to ignore the crisis. And I'm going to use this as an example that you're probably not going to agree with me on this, but the existing structure of science is good, except it doesn't necessarily solve the problems. Because, and I'll go into that in a few minutes. The other, and so let's say the Democrats are throwing money at the situation, are putting a putting a an agenda before Congress, and the Republicans are saying we don't want to spend $3 trillion on this. It's like this is not something that we want to do. So they're saying we don't want this stimulus package. This is something we don't want to borrow money to do this. We don't want to. This doesn't benefit us at all. Why would we do something that doesn't benefit us? Now, the reason I'm talking about science and in this way is that, first of all, there is no guarantee that they're going to find a workable vaccine because, and if they do, is the vaccine actually solving the problem? Now, I'm going to go forward and say that we have these two sides that basically are fighting each other now because one side doesn't want to borrow the money, but they want to focus the money. Hey, we can make money on doing this. And the other one is saying, we have to spend the money to keep the economy going. Okay, spend it with me and I'll take care of it for you. Okay, we're going to invest $3 trillion into these companies so that I can make money at it. Now, both of these are untenable situations. We're backed into the corner as a country because of this. And I'm not putting a judgment on anyone because both of these are valid perspectives. It's just that they don't solve the problems. So now, what we're going to do now is I'm going to explain what our agenda is, our plan, so to speak, and how to solve this problem. And I'm going to tell you what happened. I was a dental hygienist back in a long time ago. I graduated a long time ago. And I was working as a dental hygienist when the AIDS uh, pandemic outbreak started. And basically, we were worried about being able to get gloves. We were worried about wearing masks. We didn't have the personal protection equipment that we needed to be able to do it. We were wondering how we were going to defend ourselves, and this was a bad thing that we had to address. And I understand that. As a dental hygienist, I was always working in other people's blood. So I was probably one of the most likely people to come down with AIDS, to get it. And the problem was people were not necessarily willing to tell us that they had it because it was such a stigma associated with it. So I was one of the people, we just had to just keep on going and assume that everybody who came in through the door had AIDS, and we had to prepare ourselves for that. So I went through that whole thing years ago, and I understand where scientists is. I as my training, I didn't just learn how to clean teeth. I took classes that were part of the med school program. I took microbiology, and I took gross anatomy and pathology and all these ology type classes that were very, very scientific. I understand science. I understand where it's going. But we didn't understand what the problem with science is that up to this point, nobody knew where viruses came from. Where do viruses come from? Do they come from the animals? Did they come from a snake? How did the snake get it? Where do viruses come from? Okay, so that was the question. Is the scientists have just assumed that it comes from snakes. There's some sort of, let's say, magic that makes it come about or something like that. So let's say that science can be a little bit magical too. And okay, we'll look at, let's say, we'll just kind of give them a pass on this because they didn't really have the understanding. So when I started the prayer circle, one of the questions, and we were facing this issue, I asked, where do viruses come from? And the answer that I got was, viruses are viruses are thought forms that are manifested into the physical. We are creative in our thinking. We create our lives all the time. We create them and we recreate them, and our belief structures and what we believe, everything is, the spiritual teachings are that you create your own reality. So we're creating our own reality. We're creating, our thought forms are creating viruses. In fact, mankind has dominion over animals. So the animals are getting the viruses from humans. It's not humans getting them from viruses. So you can understand that the scientific approach isn't necessarily looking at the idea of, we are responsible for our own choices, our own belief structures, and where we are at any one time is our own responsibility. And that puts a huge burden on each one of us, because if we don't like where we are, it's up to us to change it. So now what can we do to change this? Okay, so if we get viruses from animals, then it's like, then viruses are these things out there that are beyond our control, and we might as well just give up and die, or something to that effect. Isn't that kind of what it is? But what happened now? So let's look for a minute at this virus and where it came from in terms of what we believe and what thought forms triggered this virus. Okay, so now we're going to look at this from the point of assuming responsibility for our own thoughts. We're not going to judge anybody, because anybody could have come up with this thought, and we're all responsible in some way for it. So now let's look at this for just a second. In Wuhan, China, this is what the investigators, we're not going to consider this to be manufactured in a lab, because how would they manufacture a virus and what they did? So I know science is very advanced, but let's say that's a little bit, life is a little bit beyond what science can create now, even though you can look at some of the different experiments and things like that, but we're still not quite there where we're not Frankenstein, where we're creating life or whatever. We're not God. We cannot play God at all like this. So, but that's another idea. So what we're looking at is, in Wuhan, China, a man or a woman, could have been either, equated two ideas that shouldn't have been equated. One was looking at people, and the two parts here are people and snakes. They looked at a snake and equated people and snakes. When you equate ideas, they get you into trouble. You shouldn't equate money and people and power, for example. Money and power. No, because there are people who don't have any money who are very powerful, and people who have money who aren't powerful. And if you lose your power, lose your money, then you lose your power. So it's not a good idea to equate money and power. So now what we're doing is we're looking at snakes and people. So imagine now that this man in China equated it, these two ideas that shouldn't be equated, and all of a sudden, imagine how many other people in China were susceptible to that same idea, that snakes. Okay, now I'm going to say, I'm going to hypothesize here something, and I'm not casting any blame. Like I said, we're all responsible for this at this point in time. Let's say Donald Trump started a trade war in China, and Wuhan is a business center and manufacturing center, a very large place. I've never heard of it. It's a city that I've never heard of. It's over on the other side of the world. I didn't know it existed, but it's a very large place, and it's a very industrial place, and it's a very complex place. And there are people. There's the traditional idea, the traditional Chinese idea is their tradition includes equating people and animals. There's the year of the rooster, there's the year of the tiger. There's all these ideas where people, their astrological ideas are there. So they're very prone to that idea. They're more likely to come up with that idea than other people. So what we have now is, at that point in time, was somebody equating people and snakes. And I'm not saying it was Donald Trump, but his trade war affected a lot of people. And the idea just kept on spreading. The fear associated with it, like reaction out of fear. If you look at the outbreaks and the different strains, you look at Lombardy, Italy, and that is a place of where fine fine luxury items are manufactured. You have you have houses in terms of families like Bucellati or Baccarat, and the fine Italian leathers, the purses and the shoes, for example. And you have all those things. You have China moving in and purchasing the companies and making their knockoff ideas, stealing the intellectual property. But if they buy those companies that people can't afford to buy one of those beautiful Baccarat uh, chandeliers, those things are expensive. They're beautiful, but how many people can actually afford to buy those when the economy is not good? So if they're moving in and they're selling them, and then the knockoff ideas and the Chinese moving in with their ideas and taking over the intellectual property, which is something that they have done. All of a sudden, the Chinese were the victims at one place, and they're the so-called villains in the other, the snakes in the other. So now you look at the different strains and you look at how one is one and one is the other. And then there's New York. It started in a temple, a Jewish temple, and now where did that happen? Right after the impeachment process, and people looking at Donald Trump, who was a New Yorker for many years, and his Trump hotels and things like that in his buildings, and then you look at him being acquitted from the impeachment process, and how many people are angry at him in New York. That's another strain that happened and just wiped out so many people. People die when they believe they can't get their life. Now, how people react is another thing. And so it brought in the pangolins, people. So all of a sudden, other animals were starting to get the strain too. The minks in Denmark are being. So how in Denmark, why are minks getting it from the humans in Denmark? Okay, why would pangolins? A pangolin is like an armadillo that kind of, from what I understand, it kind of rolls up in a defensive ball when it's attacked. Okay, bats hang way up out of reach in the trees but they're still susceptible to snakes that climb up the trees. So now what we have is we're equating all these ideas, and that's how people respond. Besides dying, people will react like a tiger. It was found in tigers. So now what we have is how people are responding to each of these, and passing that on to those animals, equating equating the ideas now that not so much snakes, but how we respond to snakes. So all of these different strains have come out and how people respond to them. Like in the United States, we've had the peaks, we've had surges of numbers of cases uh, with the election, with people coming out in the summertime, people not wearing masks because, hey, we're immune from that. Hey, I don't know anybody who has it, so not I'm not going to get it. I'm, beyond that, I'm going to wait for a vaccine or whatever. So now let's is this my theory correct? Okay, so let's look for a minute at other pandemics and compare them. One pandemic was the Spanish flu, and it killed many, many people back in World War I. So what was happening at that point in time that would make this somebody equate it was ideas. It was manifested into the physical in a British training camp in World War I. It's an avian virus. An avian virus, you think of birds and you think of flying. So what was happening in World War I that made people so afraid? Why would people be so afraid of birds during World War I? People were equating flying. Everybody wanted, all of a sudden there were flying machines. And the flying machines, this was just after Wilbur and Orville Wright and the flight at Kitty Hawk. So all of a sudden they had flying machines that were being used in war as a weapon, and they had machine guns. And if you think about this training camp, if you saw the movie where it was the first 8 minutes or 18 minutes or whatever it is. I didn't see the movie, but it was all about the 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 flying machines coming and strafing these soldiers in this camp. No, no way, no place to hide. Where did they go to hide? So imagine that's how that virus was manifested. And it actually keeps coming back year after year, and they keep coming back and trying to figure out how to stop it because the vaccines don't necessarily stop the virus. They don't necessarily stop the virus. So what we're doing is we're looking at an idea. Now, let's look at another one. How about Ebola? It was during um, President Obama's term in office that the threat of Ebola coming to the United States uh, triggered him to come up with this pandemic response program. So, what happened? What triggered that to happen? People and chimpanzees. In the United States, we never really saw any cases of Ebola. It never got here. And why would that happen? It's because of how we think of chimpanzees. We think of them as kind of like little brothers or sisters or whatever. They're circus animals. They're friendly. They're not our enemy at all. Are you afraid of one? If you had one jump on your lap or something, you might be afraid. But in Africa, it's a little bit different. So that's where it has happened. The Where the Ebola outbreaks have occurred, and that is because people, when equated chimpanzees and how they hunt. Chimpanzees hunt in packs, and their main prey are monkeys. And if the monkey is being chased and turns around and faces the chimpanzees, they run right over it and they leave it bloody. It bleeds from all over. It's dead. It's wiped out. And then what they'll do is the people who it was the Sudan and the Democratic Republic of Congo have been were places where there have been outbreaks, and those are places where genocides have occurred. The idea of the Janjaweed people coming and acting just like hunting the people down, the just like how chimpanzees attack monkeys and hunt monkeys. The people in a genocide I'm going to talk about genocides in my next video. But what we're looking at now is the virus and how to stop it. So the other thing is another one that I would like to look at. So here's the sociological atmosphere that exists. The pandemic that we're experiencing now uh, has this idea of snakes and this schism that's happening now. So the fear that is being generated is this separation that has divided people. We understand that there is this schism that's going on in the world, and I'm going to address that also. So another virus is the AIDS virus. And like I said, when I was a dental hygienist, I I was concerned about AIDS too, how I was whether I was going to get AIDS. And not, so the two groups of people that are most likely to get it are the people are the gay people, the gay community, and the hemophiliacs, the blood. So AIDS is a retrovirus, which means it's backwards. There's like a twist of understanding associated with it. So think about how AIDS and or how the gay community and the hemophiliacs are kind of like backwards from most people. I'm not putting a judgment on anybody again. I'm just saying it's like a backwards idea. And people still assume they put a judgment on the gay people and things like that, but it's changed a lot. And one of the first visions I ever got uh, back at that time was a vision of the AIDS virus, or the virus. And it looked like a wedding cake. The vision I had was it looked like a wedding cake. It wasn't round, it was kind of like a square made of rectangles, but stacked on top of each other. And it wasn't symmetrical. It wasn't balanced. It was off balance. And I knew when I saw the vision that if I could just make it symmetrical, that AIDS would be gone. Our body would be able to defend itself. The bodies of the people who have it would be able to create a defense against it. But it wasn't symmetrical. And then what happened was, sociologically speaking, there's never been an AIDS virus a vaccine, but unless it's happened since the last information I've gotten. But what has happened is the sociologically, there has been same-sex marriage and the sexual equality idea, the LGBT movement, and basically that has created a sense of balance again in in the world. That is how this virus, that it was so asymmetrical, is now creating a form of symmetry. And I have no idea whether or not what the status is of the AIDS outbreaks and epidemic things like that. So it's not I can share this with scientists and let them figure this out. But imagine now that if let's say if the let's say the US Supreme Court rules that same-sex marriages are illegal, let's say because of the religious idea associated with it, there's probably going to go back to uh, being AIDS outbreaks again. I wouldn't be surprised if that happens. And I'll go into that in other videos too about what God really thinks about gay people, homosexuals, whether that is something, because and you can disagree with me, you're welcome to do that. You can join the debate about this. Okay, so now what comes next is what we have to do to stop the AIDS, not the AIDS virus, excuse me, to stop the COVID-19 pandemic, is we have to look at sociologically this idea about the schism that's happened. and what we can do to solve, like gay marriage, what we can do to solve this situation. First of all, I'm going to tell you that our plan for world peace basically sets up a structure where, in the future, if the scientists can take this information and use it and apply it and actually figure out how to stop the viruses, the pandemics from the scientific viewpoint. The scientific viewpoint is not bad. It's not a bad idea. But the existing structure, when it cannot solve the problem, sometimes just makes the problem worse. So we have to look at a way to solve this problem sociologically, how to end the schism that's occurred, that's tearing people apart. Right now, as I'm doing this video, the Trump supporters are having their protests in Washington, D.C., and protesting, saying that Donald Trump actually won the election and they want 4 more years, and they're chanting that. Well, according to the existing structure, he didn't win because the Electoral College basically has been the election has been called for Biden, and it's still just going through the process. But Trump cannot come up with enough justification for giving him the the election. So what we have now is this increasing spiral, or not spiral, the peak that keeps going up now based on this election, and it keeps going up and up and up. So what can we do to stop this? Now, the way to stop this is to understand one very unifying idea for the country, and that is, okay, so let's unify the country. A long time ago, in the 1700s, we Americans, the colonists, uh, revolted against England. We rebelled against England. The first people to get drawn in were the people who stood on the principles of it. The people like John Adams and Paul Revere, the Sons of Liberty. They got together. Uh, then, then they were the first people to come in, but most of the people were not interested in it. They didn't. The people who were in it for the money said, "Wars are not good for business. We don't want a war. It's not good for business." I've like Alexander Hamilton had finally made his money. He was born into poverty, and he finally made his money, and he wasn't going to let go of it until they dragged it out of his hands. He didn't come in until he lost his money. He was part of the second group to come in, were the people who were in it for the money and power. So let's say the Democrats are standing on the principles and the Republicans are standing on the power. They have different ideas. Equating money and power, we're not going to let go of our money. The trickle down idea is not sound. That's misinformation, because nobody willingly lets go of their money and their power. Nobody willingly does it. It has to be dragged out of your hands. So the Democrats are standing on principles. We have to solve these problems, and that, but they don't necessarily understand the root cause of the problem. And that's where the problem comes in. The scientists are saying we're standing on the principles of sound science, and it's great, except they don't necessarily know the root cause of the problem. So then the third group of people to come in. So first of all, so we have the people who stood on the principles, like John Adams and Sam Adams and Paul Revere and the Sons of Liberty. And then we had the people like Alexander Hamilton, very popular. They've been made a Broadway play about him. What exactly was he doing, and why did he get involved in all this? So we understand how this works because our history is important to us. The third group of people to come into the American Revolution movement were the farmers and the people whose lives were affected. They if you read the Declaration of Independence, you know that they were not happy. The number of tyrannical things that had been happening to them, they didn't come in until they had to, until their lives were affected. And the fourth group of people the fourth 25% of the people who came in were the people who functioned for their own interests. They were the people who started the rebellion. Those were the people who functioned entirely for their own interests. So now what we have here is we have the same four groups of people. We have a movement that started. The world peace movement has started, and it's based on the creation of an international government based on the US Constitution. The world peace movement is starting. But what we're doing is we're sharing our constitution with everybody else on the planet. Creation of the international government. So what do you think would happen if we understand this idea, and to stop the pandemics from having any effect on us whatsoever, we create this international government? How about if all we ever had to do as Americans who just wanted to live our lives and live in peace, and we didn't want pandemics, and we don't want global warming, and we don't want climate change, and we don't want economic crisis, and we don't want all these things. We just want to live our lives. We want to be the people that we were born to be, and we want to do those things. All we have to do is open the debate and join the debate on the plan for the international government. I'm going to tell you that there are a lot of people who don't like the idea of a one world government. They don't like the idea of giving away our power. But what happens if you don't have the power anymore in the first place? What happens if the Republicans are saying, we're not going to share our Constitution with anyone? But what happens if they don't have any power because they basically they don't have any way, they're not solving the problems. They're not addressing the problems at all because they're basically, say, working to line their own pockets, like the idea. I'm not accusing anybody of that, because what's happening now is that you have as this division that has occurred between the Democrats and the Republicans and the people whose lives are affected. And then, so let's say you have a father and a mother and children, and they're going through a divorce, they're going through a split, the lives are affected. But then you have the neighbors over here who function for their own interests. So what do we have here? We have, let's say, Vladimir Putin functions for his own interests when it comes to the United States. He's interfering in our elections, disinformation campaign, things like that. I'm not going to call him a snake. I'm just going to say that he has the same problem in his own country because the schism is affecting the entire world. And it started out with the Iraq War. Donald Trump is playing the same set of games that George W. Bush played to justify the disinformation campaign, to justify the war in Iraq, the preemptive strike in Iraq. So what we're going to do now with this plan for the international government, we're going to not expect anybody to join. We're going to ask you to open it up for debate, and we're going to look at each idea, each government proposal about it is going to look at all of this information. What caused the schism? Where did it come from? What is it doing? Why is it tearing apart our country? Okay, because what's happening also, when the Republican Party and the Democratic Party, they're going through a schism also. And the people are going through the schism also. So you have, let's say, you have the Democratic Party back when Hillary Clinton was running for president. She had Bernie Sanders as a competition. And when he was standing on the principles. He's a man who's all principles. That's all he does, is he talks about principles. And can't you agree with that? That he's just man principles. He's pounding principles into people's head, and people are going, hey, I don't want to hear about principles. When you talk principles, it makes me nervous. It's going to cost a lot of money to do that. Medicare for all. We're going to have Medicare for all. And people are going, I don't like that idea because I don't want to pay for Medicare for everybody on the planet. People coming into our country. So it threatens the security and support of the people who are grabbing for power. So then what happens is Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders standing on the principles, and Hillary Clinton was threatened her security and support when she chose to go down into the power games. And basically, then the average Democrats basically where their lives were affected, and then they're the people who function for their own interest too. Same thing's happening. The schism is tearing apart the Republican Party. You had men like Bob Corker, Jeff Flake, people like that, and then you have the people like Mitch McConnell and uh, Lindsey Graham with the idea of power and money. Okay, I'm the Grim Reaper. I have the power to do this. I have the power to stop all of this from happening because the Constitution gives me the power to do that. And then you have the average Republicans, and their lives are being affected too. Look at how many average Americans, Republicans, have died of the COVID-19 because they're not social distancing and they're not wearing masks. They've had the red states they're getting inundated because they're not listening to the science. Okay, so here we've got it. The Republicans are dividing, and it comes down to the point where, on an individual basis, each of us has to decide basically whether we're going to vote for the plan for the international government. There are people who already recognize it and they think it's a great idea. Hey, why would we have to wage war? Why would we have to come up with a $700 billion budget for war when that money can go to the people instead? We can let somebody else handle that situation, and it's not ignoring the crisis because we're turning it over to somebody who knows how to solve the problem. We can turn it over to the JAG attorneys, the military international attorneys, and let them handle disputes. That's their job to do that. So let's let them do their job. And if there's a problem, we can find somebody who can solve the problems. It's a solution that is actually going to work. If you have if you have termites in your house, you go to somebody who knows how to solve termites in your house. You don't or a plumbing problem, you go to a plumber and you can turn it over to them. You're still solving the problems. So what we're going to do now is we're going to consider that we are now facing a movement where our Constitution, they're talking about the end of democracy. Is it the end of democracy or is it the end of a cycle? A 200-year cycle, or however many years it's been since the Constitution was signed and ratified. Let's consider that we have come to the end of the cycle of the United States, and now we're deciding, are we going to let it collapse? Are we going to watch it just dissolve? Are we going to turn our country over to Russia and be just another satellite country for Russia? Are we going to be at war with China because of the trade war? Or, what's our future? Okay, or are we just going to let it just keep going like this because we're not solving the problems? Like, what happens if we're not solving problems? We just pass them on to future generations. Now, I have kids and I have grandkids, and I would like to see a better world for them. So I have no problem working to make the world a better place because my kids are just like everybody else's kids. I know that my kids are just, I would like to leave my legacy a better place for them. And I know there are a lot of moms and grandmas and grandma and grandpas who feel the same way about me that I do. Okay. So let's consider what we're doing now. And let's, instead of choosing to go down into a global war where we have to take resources from somebody else and we have to fight for strategic locations. Let's consider people to be people all over the world, and they want the same things we want for our kids. Let's consider that to be the place where we can solve the problems in the world by turning over to the people who know how to solve the problems. And that's us. I don't mean me. I mean everybody, because everybody knows how to solve problems. Everybody has a lifetime of experience solving problems. We know what works and what doesn't work. We might not know how to fix the plumbing. I'm not an expert on plumbing. And I'll tell you what, if I have a problem with my car, I take it to somebody who knows how to fix cars. I know what I don't know. And I know that you take it to somebody who can solve the problems. And so we all have something that we can share with other people. That's the basis for our own niche, our own individual place that we can work from, something that sets us apart and what makes us unique, something that is us, that we're willing to work on for the rest of our lives. And what we can do is, if I, as a dental hygienist and somebody who started a prayer circle, know how to stop a pandemic, basically what we need to have is a voice in our government. And we need to have plans that are viable plans that we can take to our legislators and say, this is how we solve this problem. You don't have to know how to solve the problems, because I don't expect my legislators to know how to solve problems. I expect my legislators to listen to what the people are saying. That's the nice thing about Barack Obama. Uh, and when he got into the situation, because of his unique situation, he had been involved with nonprofits. When he got into the situation, he didn't say, I am going to solve this problem. He said, I know who to turn it over to, and I'm going to let them solve the problem. And then I'm going to start looking, and I'm going to look and look and look. I'm going to ask and seek and knock until I find a solution. And that's what happened, is the plan for the international government had trickled up through the diplomatic community. Then it went to, from the diplomats leveraged it up higher, and then it went to Iran, and then it went to Barack Obama. So we'll go into that in future videos, how it went forward and where it came from. And so our enemies are not necessarily our enemies. Where I'm looking at a situation here where we can all work together and start solving problems. We all have something that we want. We're like puzzle pieces. We all have something that we need. We have a solution and we have a problem. And the thing that we have to do now is to look for the people who have the solution to our problems, and we have the solution to their problems. And that's when we start making win-win agreements. That's the idea of the principles of the cooperation of nature. So Barack Obama, and I'm going to just say one thing, when the leveraged idea, he was looking for an idea that would allow him to solve problems. He could turn the idea over. And I was looking for somebody who could help me get to create this idea. I have absolutely no power. I have no money, no power. I have ideas. We don't need to have money. We don't need to have power. Those are equated ideas. What would happen if we have individual power that allows us to solve problems? And that, by assuming responsibility, that is where we get our power. Not by having a lot of money, not by becoming fabulously wealthy, not by becoming the president of the United States, not by grabbing for power, not anything like that, but by assuming responsibility. And that's where we get our power. Because a really good idea that solves problems and is simple and logical and makes people go, why didn't I think of that before? This is so logical. Why didn't we think of this before? That's a solution. Okay, let's try it. Let's open it up for debate. And if you can come up with a better plan, we'll do that. So if you can come up with a better plan for ending the pandemic, other than figuring out who to turn responsibility over to, then we'll do that. Okay? We'll turn the power over to you. We'll all get together behind you, and we'll help you create that plan. Okay? So that's all for today. Join the debate for the plan for the international government, and subscribe and click the bell for notifications and things like that. So, like I said, I have absolutely no power. I have no power. If you look around me, where am I? This is where I work. The pandemic has given everybody an opportunity to get a peek into people where they work. This is where I work. I work in a warehouse. I have, this is my shipping department, my warehouse. And I'll tell you all about what's so remarkable about my warehouse and what allows me to assume responsibility in another video sometime in the future when I feel that it's time for me to share that information. So, you know what to do? It's time for you to assume responsibility and to start thinking about what you know and to come up with a plan. We'll talk about the planning process and how, if you know the root cause of a problem with the planning process, you can solve it. World peace. I have a plan for world peace. It addresses all the stages of the planning process, and I'm willing to share it with you. It's online on our website, oneworldgov.org. So, so enough for today. Give you something to think about. Thank you for listening.